and bless the youngest one as though he were the oldest. He's given Joseph, you remember, he gave Joseph an extra portion in his blessing. He said, there's some land that's not a part of the inheritance. It's land I conquered myself. And he gave that to Joseph. And this is kind of a reward, because Joseph was sold into slavery, but because he maintained his character, he rose to some level of prominence, and God used that to save the whole family. Okay. And so we're coming up now. What we're going to read is the final blessing. Okay? So Jacob is going to bless his sons here in the immediate moments before his death. And this is an important thing in the Old Testament. We see this a lot, where the patriarch, the father of the clan, calls his sons to him and he blesses them. Okay? And so the blessing is kind of it's an important tradition. It's kind of a bequeathing, right? He's giving his position, his stature as the leader of the clan, and he's bequeathing goods and materials to his children. But also, he is passing on to his children some of the things that God has given him. Okay? And so the blessing can be a prayer, and we'll see that as we go through this. For God to provide a spiritual blessing, such as wisdom, an emotional blessing. We'll see that, happiness and joy, right? And the physical, right? Wealth and health, that kind of thing. The father's blessing generally conferred or passed on the blessings that he'd received in his life. And we saw that not last week, but the week before last. He began to recite the blessings that God had given him, right? He said, I was here, God appeared to me and said, I'm going to bless you and do this and do this and do this. And so he's passing on some of this family blessing to his children, okay? Now, also in the blessing, and we're going to see this, in the blessing, we will see some of a father's insights, right? So the man has watched his sons grow up. Now remember, we talked about the ages of these men, right? These sons. And they're anywhere from 50 to 60 down to 30. So they're grown men, all of them at this point. And so their father has watched them grow up, and he has observed them. And so the blessing has some of his observations, some of his insights into their character, or characters. Since there are 12 of them, there's more than one character. Charlotte looked like she's kind of grinning and like I'd said something funny, and I was trying to figure out, did I make a joke? Did I miss it? So now she's like, I don't know what. So anyway, we'll see that, and a blessing could also include some prophetic pronouncements, okay? So Jacob, being inspired by God, will include some prophetic announcements, and we'll see that as we move forward. So gather around and let's read in Genesis. I want to make sure I'm in the right place. Yeah, Genesis 49. We'll start in verse 1, if you're following along at home. Then Jacob called together all of his sons and said, gather around me, I will tell you what will happen to each of you in the days to come. right off the bat, this takes on a prophetic note. Come and listen, you sons of Jacob. Excuse me. Listen to Israel, your father. And then in verse 3, he begins. Reuben, you are my firstborn, my strength, the child of my vigorous youth. You are first in rank, first in power. But you are as unruly as a flood. You will be first no longer. For you went to bed with my wife, you defiled my marriage couch. and so he's going to start with Reuben. So this is Reuben. Imagine for a minute, in front of the whole family, Dad is calling you out. Okay? But there's a demotion here. And we see this demotion. So Reuben is the firstborn. Jacob starts off by recalling that Reuben has received the best of his attention, right? Strength. For those of you who have had children, many children, over a span of years, you will recognize immediately the difference that in you between your first one and the way that you were involved and your last one, right? As you get older, you're not able to spend as much energy on the children. You just don't have it, right? And so Jacob he's saying, you are the child of my youth, my vigorous youth, when I had a lot of energy. And so my power was at its maximum. And so he's remembering Reuben received the best of his attention, basically. Jacob was young, full of energy, when Reuben was also young. He received the benefit of an education from a father who expected that his son would replace him as the head of the family. Okay? And that's what, right? He's going to carry the name. He's going to be the patriarch. That's what Jacob would have expected as he was raising Reuben. So he raised Reuben to be the patriarch of the family, right? But he makes this comment. He says, you are like a flood, right? He says, but you are as unruly as a flood. So I want you to think about, how many of y'all ever seen a flood? Right? Right? Seen a flood. So once a river in its banks is directed and in control. But when the water in the river rises to the point where it escapes its banks, where does it go?
Everywhere.
Everywhere. It goes everywhere. Right? There's no controlling it. It'll go here, it'll go there. Now I know, it'll go into the low places first, right? But the lowest place is where? The riverbed. So once it comes out, right? How many of y'all have been surprised, if you've been around the flood, how many of y'all have been surprised at where water collects? You like, I didn't know that place was low, right? It doesn't appear low. You don't feel a dip as you go through it, but it's low, and the water finds that. And this is what he's alluding to here. It's undisciplined. It goes anywhere. It goes everywhere. And when it goes, what else does a flood do? It causes destruction, right? And so what he's telling Reuben, he said, I gave you the best, but you're undisciplined. You cannot control your urges. Now, there's a lesson in that for all of us, right? Whether it's anger, whether it's unbridled desires, like you can waste all of your time and energy buying cars, right? Have more cars than you know what to do with, right? And so that's what he's telling Reuben. You're undisciplined. You're like a flood water. This leads to destruction. And then he says, you slept with one of my wives. Now, this is some years ago. So, Reuben went to bed with one of one of the two handmaidens that were responsible for giving Jacob his 12 sons, right? So it was either Zilpah, which was Leah's maid, or Bilhah, which was Rachel's maid. Okay, so one of the what they would have called a little bit later on in the Old Testament, concubine. Right? So it was not his mother. Okay. Now in later years, we will see this happen, and it's a sign of ascension for a prince assuming kingship or authority to sleep with his father's wives. Not his mother, but his father's other wives, right? Now you've got to understand that in the kingdom years, a marriage, especially a marriage involving kings, was a political instrument. Okay? And so if I were a king in one country, Terry was king in another country, right? And we were kind of looking at each other sideways, like I think maybe you're trying to steal land from me, right? You could attack me at any moment. I got my army ready, and he's got his army ready, and suddenly we realize, okay, look, we got to come to peace between us. And so Terry might say, give your daughter to my son, or let me marry your daughter, right? One or the other. And now I know you won't attack me because you have family here. And I won't attack you because you're family to me. And so it was a contract to make peace. Okay? And so when we saw later on, when a king would die, the son would be made king, and one of the things he would do to show his ascension to authority would be to consummate the treaties or the marriages with those political wives. Okay? And so this is a little bit what's going on here. We see, if you look at the story of David and Absalom, Absalom did this when he tried to usurp the kingdom from David. He came in with an army. David fled the city, and David left 10 of his concubines to keep the palace. So what Absalom did, if you read the story, Absalom came in, declared himself king, and then as a way to show that he had assumed the authority, the kingship of the country, he set a tent up on the roof, had all 10 of these concubines file into the tent, and then he went in after them, and they consummated the relationship, which is, I'm assuming we're all adult enough in here to know what that means. Good, nobody raised their hand. And so he was basically showing, I have authority now that David is gone. Now, what would happen later on, just so you know, when David retook the kingdom, he took those same 10 women and he put them away. In other words, he gave them, he didn't put them in jail. He basically retired them. And he did not go into them again for his lifetime. So he treated them as widows. Okay? But that's what that was for. It was a sign of taking authority. So Reuben reaps the result of his great sin. So what was the sin? And I've added it up here for you to see. It wasn't so much the physical relationship with the women, what we would have called adultery today. Okay? It wasn't that as much as it was disrespecting his father. This was an incredible... To do this while your father is still alive is an incredibly disrespectful act. Okay? And so we see Reuben here, Jacob is blessing him, right? And he says, you had all of the advantages and you blew it. You tried to take your place that I prepared you for early. You couldn't wait, okay? The word defile here that's used, you defiled the marriage bed, that word coming out of the ancient Hebrew means a contempt for, right? Have you ever met anybody who has contempt for something or for you? Right? Do you know what contempt looks like? Contempt is a very ugly emotional response, right? And it also means a wounding, right? A wounding. It is a terrible insult. And that's what Jacob is alluding to here. It wasn't so much the physical act as it was the disrespectful act against him, right? He's impatient. He tries to replace his father before it's time, okay? When done, like I said before, when done while the father's living, it's a huge disrespect. So Reuben forfeits not only his dignity and his reputation, but his position of responsibility for the family as a whole. He will no longer, in other words, Jacob is not handing down his position as leader of the clan to Reuben. Reuben has been basically disowned. Okay? Now, he's still a son. He still gets a piece of the promised land, but he will simply be a member or a citizen. He'll be just one of the tribes. He will not be a leader. Right? And so we see this now with Reuben. Okay? Simon and Levi are next. And so we see Reuben has gone from first to last. Simon and Levi are two of a kind, so he's going to address them together. Their weapons are instruments of violence. May I never join their meetings. May I never be party to their plans. For in their anger they murdered men. They crippled oxen just for sport. A curse on their anger, for it is fierce. A curse on their wrath, for it is cruel. I will scatter them among the descendants of Jacob. I will disperse them throughout Israel. Okay? So Simon and Levi are also full of contempt. They're full of contempt for their father. And so when it comes time to receive a blessing, they don't get it. Okay? And so it's quite clear that Jacob is very displeased with Simon and Levi's methods and disregard for life. What did they do? Remember, we talked about this early on, right? Remember Dinah? Not sure, but the sister, right? Dinah, their sister, was taken advantage of by a young man in the country. And so these guys went and murdered them. We talked about, they said, yeah, the locals, the boy that had taken advantage of her, said, hey, I've fallen in love with her. Let's arrange a marriage, and it'll make peace between our families. Well, Jacob was trying to handle the matter diplomatically. Simon and Levi, very impatient, they said, yeah, Dad's not handling this quick enough to suit us. So they went to the locals and they said, look, we'd be happy to arrange a marriage between our sister and the men, your son. But we have this thing, this custom, right? It's called circumcision, and none of you guys are circumcised. So if you really want to do this, y'all going to have to get circumcised. Well, they were like, yeah, let's do this, right? Because eventually we'll intermarry and we'll assimilate all of their wealth and they'll just become part of us. And so they did. There's a reason why if you're going to get circumcised, they do it 8 days after birth. Okay? Because you're too little to remember how much it hurts. And so after they got circumcised on the second or third day, I forget which one it was, when they were so sore that they could hardly move, Simon and Levi went into this little village and killed every one of them. And apparently, according to this, right, they wounded some of the animals just for fun. Here, watch, let's see how many arrows we can stick in this ox, right? Just for pure meanness sake, for cruelty's sake. And so he's talking about that here, and Jacob remembers this, right? He remembers that moment. He says, yeah, I don't want nothing to do with y'all either, okay? He wants nothing to do with them or their plans. They're cruel and vindictive. in the nation, they will eventually be scattered amongst the population at large. And so I want you to notice that Simeon, right, and eventually this does happen. Simeon is scattered throughout all of Israel. But Levi, who is Levi? So Levi is the father of the tribe of the Levites. The Levites become the priests of God, right? But they have no place in Israel. There's no place to give to them. They are to live and take care of the temple of God, but they have no inheritance. They don't have land. They don't have homes. If they have anything, they have it in the areas of the other tribes, okay? So they're scattered. And Simeon also gets scattered amongst this. They also showed contempt. In the Old Testament culture, okay, only the patriarch could pass judgment or call for vengeance. How many of y'all remember Moses, the story of Moses when he killed the Egyptian, right? And he hid his body in the sand, and then when he got called out for it, he ran. He fled the country. And one of the reasons he fled the country is not so much the murder as it was the insult to Pharaoh. Right? He took Pharaoh's place, passing judgment and executing that judgment on someone who may have been found as guilty, right? But you can't do that. That's the judge's role. Even today, right? What do we call it? What do we say? Taking the law into your own hands. A vigilante, right? And many times, the law will come down harder on a vigilante than it will on an actual criminal. Unless it's a comic book and the vigilante is called Batman. And for those of you who are comic book fans, right? Vigilantism is not allowable. And so Simon and Levi, that's the contempt. They had contempt for their father because they took his role in deciding that punishment or vengeance should be executed on these local people. And so that's what Isaac is calling out here. So he's saying, I don't want nothing to do with you, okay? They took their father's place in avenging Dinah. All right, so now we get to the fourth son in line, Judah. All right, now remember Judah. Judah had his own problems, right? None of them had anything to do with his father, right? He was less than honorable in dealing with his daughter-in-law. Remember that she's the one that kind of stood by the side of the road. And he was like, "Oh, hey, look, here's a lady of the evening. I'll just take a few moments with her." And when she showed up pregnant, he was going to judge her harshly. And remember, this would have been a great movie, right? She threw down his ring and his staff and his robe and said, "These belong to the man who's made me pregnant." And he looked down there and he was like, "Oh, it was me," you know. But at least he admitted it, right? He was honest enough to admit it. And so he admits his mistake. Also, we see, and we talked about this at some length, Judah is the one who had the idea to kill Joseph and then decided, oh wait, why kill him when we can sell him? Right? That was Judah. But then he's the one who stands up and he doesn't offer like Reuben did. Reuben offered his own son. Here, take my sons if I don't bring Benjamin back alive. Judah puts himself up as the sacrifice. Okay? And so we see Judah, we see some fundamental change in Judah over the years. And so apparently Jacob has recognized that. And so here's what he tells Judah. Judah, your brothers will praise you. And Judah's fourth born, okay? He's not the oldest, but he's going to get the blessing of the oldest. Judah, your brothers will praise you. You will grasp your enemies by the neck. All your relatives will bow before you. Judah, my son, is a young lion that has finished eating its prey. Like a lion, he crouches and lies down. Like a lioness, who dares to rouse him? The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from among his descendants, until the coming of the one to whom it belongs, the one whom all nations will honor. He ties his foal to a grapevine, the colt of his donkey to a choice vine. He washes his clothes in wine, his robes in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine, his teeth are whiter than milk. Right? So this is a firstborn's blessing. Right? There's prosperity in this. There's fierceness. There's victory. All of this is included in this blessing. So as we go down through here, he receives the equivalent of a firstborn blessing. He has power and victory over his enemies. He will grab them by the neck. Right? The neck is considered a vulnerable part. Right? So if you have somebody by the neck, you've gone in for the kill. Right? If you look, if you watch any of the National Geographic shows, right? Where does the lion go? What's the lion go for? Goes for the neck. If he goes for anywhere else, he can be hurt. But he goes for the neck. Right? How many of y'all seen those antelope with the really long, straight horns? Right? And I always looked at those and I thought, I mean, short horns I get, right? Because you can get your head down, and with those really long, and they kind of go backwards. So when his head is up, right, the horns are going back this way, and you're like, what? How do you get those down? You know, if something's coming at you, you practically have your nose in the dirt to get them horns down there. And I saw a lion hunting one of those things. And when I realized the lion chased this antelope and then leapt up on his hind end, right? Like this. And that antelope went, and those horns reached back and poked that lion. And the lion let go. And I was like, oh, that's what the horns is for. They're not for protecting his front. They're for protecting his rump. Okay? So the lion, when he attacks from behind and he jumps on the back, he can be hurt. But if he goes for the neck, even if you had short horns, if the lion's under here, where are the horns? Wrong side of the head, right? And the lion's got you. And that's what he's talking about here. Judah has his enemies by the neck. Once you have somebody by the neck, there's not much they can do to you, right? It's victory. Power and victory over your enemies, okay? And so that's what we see here. The relatives will bow before you. You will be the leader of the family, right? Now, you've got to think as history unfolds, this is where we see Judah, okay? Like a young lion, the young lion at the height of his power and majesty, right? That's this. A lot of this is symbolism. He will consume those who are against him. A young lion has eaten his prey. He lays down. When he lies down full, right, he is satisfied, okay? He hunts and stalks his enemy. That's the crouching, right? It says he crouches down. That's hunting and stalking. Like a lioness, right? Who dares to rouse a lioness when she has cubs, right? What is the most fearsome critter on the face of the planet? A mother. That's right. Doesn't matter. Lion, elephant, water buffalo, a mother. If she has cubs that she's protecting, she will stand against anything. That may not be successful, right? But she will stand against everything. How many of y'all seen the, I think it was in California? They had an earthquake and it had a video of these elephants in a zoo. And when the earth hit, you watch, these elephants are all over the elephant compound, right? And when the earthquake hit, these elephants, and they were all females, these elephants all ran to the middle and where there was a couple of young ones, and they circled up around those young ones. Yep. right? You saw that? So what they do is they all put their rumps to the inside, they put the little ones in the middle, and they're all facing the outside, right? It doesn't matter what they're facing it. And it doesn't matter which way it's come from, they got somebody that's watching in that direction, okay? And so that's what we see here. Judah is going to be a fierce protector, okay? The scepter that we see about, in verse 10, we see the scepter will not depart from Judah. And so the scepter is signified he will be king. A scepter is a sign of royalty, of kingship, kingly authority. But it's just 12 guys. Right? So what we're seeing here is that even though no one's thought of that concept, we're seeing the future being foretold. That there will be a time the king of Israel will be from the tribe of Judah. And anybody say David? Okay? Also, there's another phrase used here in verse 11. Oh, I'm sorry, in verse 10. It says that the ruler's staff will not depart. He says, not depart, nor the ruler's staff from his descendants, until the coming of the one to whom it belongs, the one whom all nations will honor. Now, the Jews think that meant David, right? When you would read this blessing some centuries later, well, that's David, right? David was the one to whom it belonged, right? David was the greatest king, warrior king in the history of Israel. But for those of us who have lived on this side of the Old Testament, on the New Testament side, who are we talking about here? Jesus. Right? And the key for part of the phrase is the one whom all nations will honor. Right? So Jacob, some 10 or 20 centuries ago, as he is blessing them, is making prophetic pronouncement that Judah will bring forth the Messiah. Now, Joseph's father, by earthly reckoning, not Joseph's father, Jesus' father, Joseph, by earthly reckoning, the carpenter, was from the tribe of Judah. His mother, Mary, was from the tribe of Judah. Both of them, in their own right, were descendants of David via different paths. Okay? So, not via Solomon. And they didn't come down through Solomon. They came down through one of the brothers. But so all of this, so we see Jacob's prophecies here coming true. Okay? We understand that the prophetic word he's speaking was speaking of Jesus. So, finally, we get to the imagery. We get to the imagery of the foal. Let me read it again. He ties his foal to a grapevine. Now, the foal, the colt of his donkey, to a choice vine. Now, we just went through Easter, right? And so, what did Jesus ride in to Jerusalem on? Colt, the foal of a donkey. Right? Once again, we begin to see in this prophetic pronouncement, we begin to see Jesus, right? He says, we see the Last Supper, the final Passover, the grapevine, a parable of Jesus. Remember, he said, I'm the vine, you are the you are the branch, right. I'm the vine, you're the branches, you bear fruit from my life, right? And so we see all of that being very subtly alluded to in this blessing. Okay? Now, washing the clothes in wine, eyes darker than wine, teeth whiter than milk, all of that. This was, for the time, was a sign of wealth and prosperity. But also, I believe that washing the clothes in wine also symbolized the blood of the crucifixion. So, Easter, what we refer to as Easter, the Passover, right? Jesus died. His blood was shed. His blood was shed for our sins. Okay, so this was the physical realization of the Passover. So you remember, and we're going to get to this when we study the Exodus, but you remember what the Passover was, right? They sacrificed a lamb. They took the blood of the lamb, and what did they do? Put it on the doorpost, right? So they put the blood of the lamb on the doorpost, right? So it was the blood. And so the wine, washing the clothes in the wine, it turns them red. And so I believe that this is an allusion to the sacrifice that Jesus, so we're talking about Jesus. To me, it's obvious that we're talking about Jesus. And so he will be successful in his efforts to bring salvation to the people. Okay? And so that's where all this was. And of course, Judah, as I said before, Judah was the tribe that the kings came from, tribe that Messiah came from, the tribe that was a nation in its own right. When the 12 tribes split, 10 tribes went to the north, right? And 2 tribes stayed and formed their own nation. The 10 tribes to the north quit being a country soon after. They were conquered by Assyria. But Judah and Benjamin, right? They remained a country down through the years of the Romans until after Jesus' death. And so they were a nation in their own right. And we see all of that. They were the last tribe standing in the Promised Land as a political unit, a tribe of all of the 12. Okay? So they lasted the longest. All right. Zebulun and Issachar. This is the last blessing. I know this is just kind of dull, boring stuff, but I wanted to cover these blessings because the blessings have a definite bearing on the end of our study of Joseph. So Zebulun and Issachar, right? Now, everybody knows Judah, and as a tribe, but Zebulun and Issachar, hardly anybody ever talks about them. They're some of the lesser known tribes, right? Now, they're after Judah in their birth order, but they're reversed in the blessing. So let's just read. Zebulun will settle by the seashore and will be a harbor for ships. His borders will extend to Zidon. Issachar is a sturdy donkey resting between 2 saddle packs. When he sees how good the countryside is, how pleasant the land, he will bend his shoulder to the load and submit himself to hard labor. Okay, so Zebulun is born after Issachar, but he's mentioned first in the blessing. I'm not sure, 100% sure why this reversal was there, but he's mentioned first. So they're out of their birth order here, these 2 individuals. Now he says Zebulun's land grant. So when they get to the Promised Land, Zebulun was given a piece of land that was ironically not next to the seashore. But it was next to a city called Sidon. Okay, S-I-D-O-N. Sidon was a port city, and Zebulun was able to benefit by making a treaty and becoming a tribe prosperous on products from the ocean. I guess that's the best way to try to say it. Right? So they were able to capitalize on the sea trade. Okay? Now the border with Sidon refers to the seagoing people, and that's most likely the point of this prophecy. And then Issachar, he says he's a donkey. He's a sturdy donkey resting between 2 saddle packs. And so the inference here is that he's willing to work hard for a goal. He's trustworthy and he's loyal. Now there's a little bit of thought here that because when they moved after the Exodus, when they moved in, that Issachar, the tribe of, was unable or unwilling to subdue the Canaanites, right? So they couldn't wipe out the Canaanites, that they basically just decided to live in peace with them and carry that burden, right? But here he says they'll see how pleasant the land is, and so he's willing to work hard for a goal. The reference to servitude, right? It includes servitude, and this is an interesting reference to servitude because in his territory were the cities of Capernaum and Nazareth. Okay? And so if those two cities sound familiar, it's because that those two cities, well, Nazareth obviously is where Jesus was raised. He began his ministry in Capernaum. And a lot of his ministry was in this area. A servant, right? And so he served, he ministered and witnessed to people in this area. All right, so I'm going to stop it right there. I know it's early, but we've got a little bit to do to put church back in order after Easter Sunday. So I'm going to stop it right there. We'll pick up the last 6 blessings next week, and then we'll move on to Exodus. Exodus will be a little more exciting. There's chariots, there's water, there's death and destruction. It's an incredible story. Any questions? Y'all afraid to ask questions after last week?